The first thing we're going to talk about is how to make the bottom piece, and the bottom piece is the really pretty Indian die, and we're going to make that first. So if you have a hydraulic press, I'm going to show you how to do it in the hydraulic press. If you don't, you will have bought one of these pre-made. Okay? In your little handout, there was one of these, and this will be the back piece. You're going to cut this little piece out. I stamped my logo on the back. That's going to be the back part of the focal. And then the top piece, which is going to be your Indian die, will be shaped in a triangle. And I just put this in so that you can have some sort of a idea of what the shape is going to be. You're going to lay one shape inside of the other, and that's going to be your focal. Or more correctly, it's going to look like this. Okay? Just a rough introduction. All right. You are also going to need, and you should have these anyway if you're an artist, seriously, if you're doing any sort of metalsmithing, these are so great. I use them for all kinds of stuff. I have a big ellipse template. I don't know where I got it, but it's called an isometric template. And it says 35 degrees, 16 at the top, oval on it, and that's what I use to make my shape. And then this is the stud letter, just big circles pendant, and it's called the Professional Combo Circle Template, number 977110 from Stud Letter. Now you could probably find this on Amazon as well. If not, try a drafting supply. But these are good to have for making shapes and backgrounds. And when you're doing these kind of things, you know, where you're cutting out shapes and you're free-forming and you're making structured pieces, you know, it's good. Nobody can draw a solid circle without a little bit of help, okay? So I use these a lot. These are my two go-tos. So if you can get these are good. These will help you make your this shape really well, because it's really hard to stamp on a piece that's already cut into the shape for the hydraulic press. And I'll tell you why, and that's because things shift. The metal moves, and you can even see this one was meant to be centered, and it's off-centered and tilted a little bit. And that's kind of the way they come out. And so that's why these little half circles come in, or the ovals I should say, because you can go in with your ellipse and draw the top part. What I used is a circle on the bottom to make this the bottom part, okay? So you can draw them right in, and it just works a lot better. So what I'm going to do is, first I'll show those of you who have a hydraulic press how to make one, and then we'll pick up with the stamping part once you have the stamping, and we'll show you how to saw it out, okay? So let's do that. Let's go to the hydraulic press, and for those of you that don't have one, you might want to watch just for future use. It might encourage you to want to get one, okay? Because there's lots of fun stuff you can do with these little things, okay? So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have a piece of silver that is about 1.5 inch square, and that will accommodate your little shape inside, and then you can saw it out. And then you'd want to stamp in the center. So what I recommend you doing is stamping on the square in case it gets off center, and then you'll still have room to saw out around it. So if you have your die, you can see I've actually drawn a 1.5 inch square around it. This is a 2 inch die, so I just laid my little square, I centered it, and now I can see where the lines go. And that is the way that I will put it in the press. But before we do that, we have to anneal it. Okay, if you're new to annealing silver, or you haven't done it much, a lot of people over anneal. So what I would suggest is you just take a nice Sharpie and you draw a little line around to kind of cover the whole thing. And you heat it up, and once that Sharpie line is gone, your piece is annealed. So a lot of people are really over anneal, and this will maybe help you until you get the hang of seeing that you don't have to heat it till it glows red to anneal. And I just use kind of a bushy flame here for annealing. Alright, so here's our little piece. And I also don't anneal on a charcoal block, because if you do, it's a good way to melt silver. Charcoal blocks get really hot. You can see it's already dissipating, right? Okay, so my piece is now annealed. That the Sharpie is all gone. So I'm going to quench it, clean it up, and then we'll put it in the hydraulic press. Okay, so I have my die, I have my annealed piece of silver, and the first thing I want to do is put some lubricant inside of my die. A light coat, you don't need it to be too heavy. It'll just help the metal not to stick in there and to release a little bit easier. And you can use Burr Life liquid or some sort of oil if you like. And then I'm going to, I have a little square drawn on the outside, and I'm just going to line my 4 corners up with the lines that I have drawn on my piece, and it's nice and centered. And then what I want to do is place this inside of my press, but before I do that, I'm going to lay some lead on top of it, and that's why I'm wearing gloves. So Putter USA sells lead, eBay sells lead. Usually comes in sheets. It's really soft. You can roll it up and make it into different shapes. And so I'm just going to fold this in half, and this will in the press, this will become the male portion. It will squeeze it down, force the metal down in, and make a male part for my female die. Okay, so I'm going to place it on top like that, making sure everything's still centered. And then I'm just going to put it into my press, like so. You also, when you put things in your press, you just want to make sure that they are centered, okay? So you want this to be centered vertically and horizontally so that the pressure is even. All right, and now I have an electric press, so it'll be different for those. You'll have to pump your press if you have a manual press, but I'm going to press until I see the silver or the lead around the outside. I know that was loud. What I was trying to tell you is I press until I see the silver or the lead flatten out around the outside. And usually you have to anneal it and do it again. So let's see how it looks. Yeah. So I didn't get a very deep impression. I got the start of one, but one more time ought to do it. So I'm going to anneal it. After I get it out of here, it can be a little tough to get these out sometimes. If you have a knife or something you can slide around, it should lift right out. There it goes. Okay, so I got the start of a good impression, but it's not quite crisp enough, so I'm going to hit it one more time. So first I'll anneal it, and this is what you should do at home as well. You want to make sure there's no oil on it, so if you want to pickle it or clean it, if you do anneal it with the oil, it'll just burn on, make some smoke. It's not going to hurt it any, but you just don't need to be inhaling a bunch of smoke. I'm just wiping all the oil off of it. And then I'll put it down here, and we'll give it a little quick anneal. So if you overpress it, it can rip on you, and you just want to be careful to try to avoid that. Okay. So I'm going to quench it and wipe it down really good so it's nice and dry. No need to pickle. Okay. There we go. So now I'm just going to once again make sure there's a little bit of oil in my die, which there still is. And a little bit, I'm going to put a little bit on the top too because it will help it lift up. There we go. And I'm going to go back in again and place this face down until it locks into place right where it's supposed to be. And I can kind of use the guides I drew on there too to see where it's supposed to go. And once I get it down in there, it just snaps down in. I'll put it back here. And what's really important is that, so there it is back up in my press again. And I think if I just use that same lead and I just fold it again, it should be fine. I'm just folding it to make it thick. Back up on top. And then go for it again. Okay, so here we go. that looks really good. The impression looks awesome. Right, this one's a little bit stuck, so I'm going to try to slide something up. There it goes. And you can see it didn't really stay in the center. That's why it's good to have all this extra space around. So wipe off the lubricant, pickle it, and scrub it good with a brass brush until you get it nice and shiny. And then we will take it over to the bench and decorate it. So what I've done is I just added some silver balls where I thought they might look really cool, and some 5mm bezel cups. And I'm just kind of playing here and deciding the placement of where I would like to solder on balls and bezel cups. And I'll bring in some tube settings in the mix here too. So in laying out my piece here, I've got my bezel cups, I have hematites and garnets and my little balls, and I'm going to add tube settings on here. So I'll be using 2 3mm CZs and 4 2.5mm CZs. And you can do 5mm too if you want. You don't have to do any bezel cups if you just want to do all tube settings, or you don't have to do any tube settings if you really don't want to. You can do these however you want. So these two are actually 3mm and millimeter, and I just kind of wanted some various sizes. And I'm just using balls from casting grain. Okay, so I get a bunch of casting grain, looks like this, and I just pick out my balls. If they're not quite round, I reheat them to make sure that they get round. And I try to find ones that are the same size, and then I just start decorating. Okay, so I just put a little ball in each of where the lines come in here and on the inside to make it interesting. All right, and I just I drew myself a little border that I want to stay within when I'm decorating it, because I don't want my piece to get, this is a 1.5 inch square, and I like these little balls in the middle. Let's see what else, and I'm actually just designing here right with you. I don't really have a plan yet, okay, so I'm just going to figure out what I want to do, and this is really good for you to see, because it's a good way for you to be creative when you're making your own things. I like to sometimes just start with something and design around what I've started with. So here I'm just going to design right with you, so I thought it would be good for you to see this process. I'm going to try to place my little rhinestones wherever they might look interesting. Let's see. And I think I need some filler down here at the bottom, so maybe I'll put these little 2mm down at the points, and I'll put these bigger ones at the point, and maybe I'll just do balls around on the in between these little guys here. Maybe I'll add some more rhinestones up here, tube sets. Let's do let's see. Anyway, you get the idea. I'm just playing until it looks nice. So you just start with something, and the idea is to layer this up so it no longer just looks like a Putter USA stamping or a Tucker tool die. You know, you want to make it look unique and interesting and have a little pizzazz to it. Okay, so and you want to also kind of try to have it, you want it to be kind of symmetrical. Okay, so I'm just playing here. And when I come up with something I like, I'll stop. So I like those two there. I like these two here. Maybe I'll do some balls on the outside here. And a little ball here. Now I know you guys have a hard time with balls. Balls can be tricky, but they really are beautiful to a beautiful way to dress up a piece, or just to make it more interesting, give it some dimension, add some texture. I mean, that's the whole idea. That's what you kind of want to do here, okay? So here I have a little combination of balls. Some are on the tips, some are in the center, but I think it all kind of works together. So you can just decide how you want your piece to look. Maybe you might not like what I'm doing, so you're welcome to do exactly what I did, but if you feel the need to do something different and really be creative and make this your own design, that is even better. So just do whatever feels good. Okay, so that feels good. So I just kind of made this design up here while I'm filming. And this is something that is really great for the mind. I think it really helps you to think about design and space and continuity and form and depth and dimension by adding to other things, okay? And this is what makes your piece your own, makes it unique, and makes it something that you want to sell because it's your design. You know, it's not mine. It's yours. So now you have your design and you've decided how many CZs you're going to want, if any. For those, you'll need to saw out tube settings for each stone in the proper size tube. Refer to the handout on the web page for more instructions on tube setting. Okay, so I have 6 CZs that I'm going to be putting on my pendant. I've got 2 3mm and 4 2.5mm stones, and then I'm going to need 3 tube sets of the bigger, the 5.6mm for the back, okay? So I wrote it down so it'd be very uncomplicated for you, okay? Whatever size stone you use, you want to get a heavy walled tube from Rio that is about 0.50 bigger, a half a millimeter bigger than your stone. So for 2.5mm stones, you're going to want a 3mm tube, and I'm going to cut 4 of them. For my 3mm stones, I'm going to need a 3.56mm tube. That's the next size up that Rio carries. And I'm going to need 2 of those, okay? Now, if you don't want to have all these different tubes sizes, you don't have to. That's totally up to you. So this is what I'm doing. These smaller tubes, I'm going to cut them to be 3mm tall. That's it, 3mm tall. For the feet that I'm putting on the back of the pendant, I'm going to cut this one to be 5mm tall. And I'm using a tube that is 5.61 in width. So it's a 5.61 diameter tube. These will all be on your supply list. If you can't figure out what I just told you about finding the right size tube that's a half a millimeter bigger than your stone, call Rio and they will be glad to help you, or you can open up a chat with them and help you choose the right tube for the size stone that you need. Okay, so now I said I was going to need 3 of the 5mm tubes, and I'm going to make them 5mm tall, and they're going to go on the back of my pendant. So what you need to do, you want to start with a nice filed edge. And if your edge isn't smooth and filed, if it came from, right out of the box and you just got it from Rio, you'll have a beautiful edge because the way they cut these. But if it's not, you can just take a file and run it across and give it make sure it's nice and even. And then what you want to do is you want to measure it with a pair of calipers, 5mm, and put a little scribe on it. Okay, so you just want to scribe it with your calipers so that you can see where you're going to cut it. And like I said, I need 3 exactly the same size. Now you can use a tube jig or you can use a miter jig. Either one will hold the tube for cutting. If you decide you want to use the miter jig, I don't know, let's see how big this goes. I think you could get a 5mm tube in here. Yeah, you can. So, but what you do is you put it in there and you find your scribe line, and then you tighten it up and you just put your saw in, and I'm just going to put my saw in this way and keep my saw blade right up against my miter jig and file until the little tube comes off, and then you've got your little tube. Now, I don't like to use a miter jig for tubes because I have a tube jig. And it doesn't really matter. Whatever tool you like to use is fine. All right, so I've got my little scribe line, and you can make these 5mm and they will be perfect. So you just go in and you start sawing, and I'm just going to saw, And remember never to push. Let the blade do, or let the saw do all the work that's on the blade. If you start pushing it, you're going to break a blade. But if you don't push and you just have a really light grip, it's going to come off very, very simple. And bing, there it goes. Okay, so I need 3 in that same size. I need to cut 3 tubes for this one, and then you cut a tube for each stone you're going to be setting as well. Okay, so now I would advise you to take a picture of this piece, and we're going to go over to the soldering table and solder all of this on. You do need to take a picture, or you might not remember where your balls and everything go. Okay, so what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to heat my piece from underneath. So however you want to do that is fine. I love these titanium clips. You can bend them in any way, shape, or form you want to. They're the new concept ones, and they're optional on your supply list. But you can use whatever method you want to prop your piece up. The higher you get it, the easier it will be to get your torch up underneath. Up under here, okay? So I want to work from the outside edge of my block here because I'm going to be feeding the torch up here, and I'm using the charcoal, my long life charcoal brick, my 5-inch round from Rio Grande, and just a couple of broken other blocks that I have. These are honeycomb blocks, and they have little holes in them, so the heat really goes through them, and they heat up really fast. They get pretty hot. So, and I can put my little piece in between here. And just want to get this kind of centered so that I have as much open space under there to get the flame up as I can without losing my piece. Okay, so I'll do something like that. Okay, so there you can kind of see the setup that I have. Now I'm going to I'm not sure exactly what I'm doing yet. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some solder underneath here, little chips probably, and I am going to go with medium solder because I think I may be soldering another piece onto this, such as bales. Okay, all right, so another thing that I do that might be helpful for you guys to know is I cut my wire solder. I buy solder in wire. It comes in 22 gauge or 20 gauge from Rio Grande, and it comes on a roll like this. This happens to be 20 gauge. Okay, so and then I cut it so that I don't. I hear all the time, oh, my solder, the tag fell off. How do I tell if it's easy, medium, or hard? Well, what I do is I learned this in school. Is if it's easy, if it's hard, you just cut it into little like 4-inch strips, little wires like this, and then bend. 1 bend is hard, a bend and a half is medium, and 2 bends is easy. And I keep these in a little jar next to my bench, and that way if I lose the tags off my sheet wire, it doesn't really matter because I know what it is. And then when I cut, I work from the bottom here, and the bottom I'll just cut little pieces from there. Okay, so cut up some solder. You're going to need a lot of chips, and I just like to put mine in a little cup. I have this little cup here, and I'm just going to cut up some. You also, it would be for this exercise, since you're going to be setting things on top of it, you're going to want to make sure that you flatten your wire out. So you can see this one has been put through a rolling mill. You can hammer it to get it flat, because if it's in a lump form, it's going to make your piece rock, and your piece is going to shift when you put it on. So always make it flat for this sort of application, okay? And then you just cut up a bunch of little tiny pieces in a cup with some, and I use Prips flux, so I'll put liquid flux in the bottom, and we'll start putting it on. Okay, so I'm just going to start with the balls, because balls are always the hardest for people to get, and it seems like if there's any mistakes, you can do your balls, and then you can scrub real hard to make sure you have them all on, and if you do, then you're good, and you can go on to the next step. Okay, so I have put a little solder chip where I want each ball to go. Basically, I use 22 gauge, really thin solder wire, and I just cut a a little piece for each ball, okay? And I put them underneath. You need to make sure you have enough solder, and they're also going within the crevice so that they don't flow all over the top, hopefully. And you just want to make sure that you have enough of a solder chip in there to connect the ball, because if you don't, it's all for naught, okay? So now, if you're having trouble with your balls rolling off, it's because they're not flat on one side. So you should try to reheat them until you get a flat end. One end will definitely be flat, and one, you know, they'll be there. If you bought the casting grain, they might be more round and not have a flat side. If you make your own balls and you heat them on a charcoal block, they'll always have a flat side. So just go through and make sure you have the flat side down and lay it on top of the little piece of solder there. If it's turned around, it'll roll off. And things do tend to move around when you're working with little pieces like this. When I heat up this flux, it's going to cause everything to bubble if I'm not careful. So I may have to come back and do some adjusting. Looking for the flat part. There's the flat part of that ball. Okay, once you get your solder chips where you are, and your balls placed on top where you want them now, so I'm going to heat this up really carefully so that I can try to avoid that nothing rolls around. And I'm just going to widen out the shot so you can just kind of see my torch set up and what I have going on here. I'm using the Smith Little with a page tool tip. I'll be using the M3 here from Page Tools, the Page Tools tip. So I'm just going to gently heat from underneath so that the little bit of flux that I used, that I dipped my solder in, doesn't go all over the place, and I just kind of want that to dry out. So once that gets nice and dry, I will spray some flux on the top. But if I did that right now, things would just start flying all over. So I'm just going to carefully heat it until all the little chips are dried and they're settled in there. I'll move my torch back up to the top and just circle around, getting it nice and hot. Okay, now this piece is really, really hot. Should be anyway. And I'm going to start adding some flux. Alright. I'm going to go back to heating. It's a little different when you don't want things to pop around. You got to be creative. And I'm just heating from the bottom, and I'm waiting for all those little solder chips to flow. Have a pick handy in case something moves. You need to fix it, that you can. We're using medium solder, and the thing also about medium solder is it doesn't really run too much. It'll kind of just go where it's put, kind of like hard solder. So everything kind of went into place. I'm just going to go over the top and hit it. See, I wanted it to adhere from the bottom because if you have the solder melt while your torch is on top, the solder will flow up onto the ball and it won't attach to the plate, okay? So that's kind of why I do it this way. It's really easy right now to adjust anything if you need to. So just, you've got it nice and hot, you can move things around. Everything looks pretty good there though. I'm pretty pleased with everything, okay? So now we're ready for part 2. More balls. Right, I'm not gonna bother doing anything else to it except to add a little bit of solder where I want my next pieces to go, and I'm going to put it right where the balls are going to be attached. Down here I can be a little bit more generous with my solder. I don't really care if it flows so much because I don't have, there's like no place for it to go except on my balls. I just have to be sure I get everything in the right place, okay? So I think we said we're going to do them there and there. If you have a picture, it's good. This might be a good time to check it so that you know you're putting your balls in the right place. Okay, so I've just added 4 balls, the last 4 balls there, and I can heat from underneath and melt those down. And I'm just going to do that. Again, I didn't add any flux yet. Once again, heating from underneath. Coming back around to the top a little bit here. And now I'm going to add some flux. I'm going to open up the shot so you can see my torch here. Just waiting for everything to flow and all this. Make sure you've got a solder or a pick handy always, just in case something moves on you. And once you see the solder melt, you can move back up to the top. The one that hasn't flowed yet. There we go. Because like I said, if you let the solder okay, that is one well soldered on little piece, so I'm good to go, and I'm ready to put on my little bezel cups. And this is a good time to quench and pickle your piece and scrub those balls with a brass brush. Make sure they're very securely attached before you solder on anything else. And everything's really well secured on there, and I can see solder all the way around. Nothing's going to come off, so I'm good. You can actually see the solder being attached to the ball. If you can't see that it's melted on, then you know you need to go back and redo it. I've also noticed a little bit of a problem, and I wanted to just show you this. There is a little tear, tiny one, but be it ever so little. I noticed it when I was soldering. There's a little bitty gap there. So if I were to saw this out, you know, it would be fine, but if I wanted to leave some extra space, it would be an issue. So I'm going to lay a little ornament there and solder it on to fill that in, and we'll go from there. Probably just add some balls, or add some balls. When all else fails, add some balls. Okay, so I went off camera and just soldered on 2 balls to kind of, one on each side of the bottom, to kind of fill in that little tear that I had. And I'm sure you guys can easily do that since you know how to solder on balls. And now I'm going to continue to put on the bezel cups and tubes. Bezel cups on the bottom, and I'm going to be a little bit generous with that one because it's got a wider area to cover. I'm still using medium solder chips. These are dipped in flux. And under each bezel cup at tube settings, I'm laying 2 flat pieces of solder and setting the tubes and cups right on top. That way the tube won't waller around. It'll be straight. Little tube setting on top. Same with the bezel cup. I do 2 and then I set it on top. And my little guy, put him right on top. And then we're good to go. Just go take a look, make sure everything's centered, and be prepared that when you heat it up, things are definitely going to move around. I'll back up here. I'm just going to have to try back in business. Here we go. Okay, make sure you have your solder pick ready to catch things when they start sliding around there. These are already, if you see when you hit it from the top, the that crazy flux, it starts to move. You just got to go back and put everything where you
want to avoid keeping your torch pointed on a bezel cup or a tube setting for any long period of time because they will melt. So just flash over them and graze over them with the torch, but do not let your torch stay put on one of them.
But you're pretty safe heating from underneath if you feel comfortable doing it this way, because things don't move around quite so much. There we go. It's just super important. You don't want to reticulate, so keep a nice distance from your torch to your piece so that you're not overheating anything. These little bezels are really thin, so they tend to want to go down really fast. You can melt them really fast, so make sure you're keeping an eye on everything. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 6 tube settings and 2 bezel cups going on right now. Now, in order for everything to melt, the pieces on top have to be just as hot as the bottom one, where the solder will flow up. So remember, solder flows where the heat goes. So if I'm up here, that's where the solder's going to go. I'm just heating these tubes up because they are a little bit on the thick side. There we go. We just want them to lay down and find their place and make sure that they're where they're supposed to be. This one's a little bit crooked, so I'm going to move it. There we go. Make sure it's nice and flat. That looks good. So I'm seeing solder flowing all the way around on this end. I'd like to see a little bit more on this end, so I'm going to actually turn my piece and open that up so I can get a little bit more under there. You just want to make sure you're checking to get a good connection all the way around. You don't want to overheat. You don't want to melt anything that shouldn't be, melted. So just be careful. Alright, looks like everything's just going down nice and easy. Okay, and there we have it. Do take a minute though just to go around. If you didn't see solder come out all the way around the sides, then you probably didn't get a really good connection. And it's always worth it just to give it a turn on your turntable and just make sure all those seams are down flat. There we go. Okay, and then we're going to quench it and pick